There is a family in Italy that most people outside the country have never heard of. At one point, their companies accounted for over 4.4% of the entire Italian economy. They own Ferrari, they own the company behind Jeep, Peugeot, Chrysler, Alfa Romeo and Maserati. They own Juventus. And through their holding company, Exor, incorporated not in Italy but in the Netherlands, they sit at the top of a €38 billion empire that stretches from Turin to Amsterdam to New York. Their name is Agnelli. In the late 1800s, Italy wasn't an industrial power. It was fragmented, uneven, still heavily dependent on agriculture, with only a few regions beginning to experiment with modern industry. Turin was one of those places. Quietly, almost unnoticed, it was turning into a centre of engineering, manufacturing, and ambition. This was the environment where everything began to shift. There was just a small group of investors placing a bet on something that no one had yet understood, the automobile, and at the centre of that group was a man named Giovanni Agnelli, born in 1866 in Villa Perosa, a small town in the Piedmont region, roughly 80 kilometres southwest of Turin. His family were landowners, not aristocracy in the grandest sense, but established, the kind of provincial wealth that came with generations of owning the right land in the right place. He trained as a cavalry officer at the Military Academy of Modena. Then, in 1898, he met Emanuele Cacciarano di Brisciarasio, who was quietly raising investment for a horseless carriage company. On July 11th, 1899, Fabbrica Italiana Automobili Torino, Fiat, was registered. Giovanni Agnelli's founding contribution, $400. $400 to begin an empire that would eventually shape the destiny of an entire nation. The first factory opened in 1900 with 35 employees. They produced 24 cars that year. By 1906, Fiat was producing over 1,000 annually. Giovanni had opened the first Fiat dealership in the United States, on Broadway, Manhattan, and the company had gone public on the Milan Stock Exchange. He had started as a junior partner. He would end as its undisputed master. What separated Giovanni from the other founders was not charm, it was calculation. He understood that technology alone does not build empires. Contracts do, governments do, wars do. When the Italo-Turkish War broke out in 1911, Fiat supplied military vehicles. When the First World War consumed Europe, he moved even faster, securing military contracts at scale, shifting factories in Turin to wartime production, trucks, tanks, aircraft engines, tractors, diesel machinery. By the time the war reached full intensity, Fiat employed more than 30,000 workers. After the war, Fiat had vaulted from 30th to 3rd among all Italian industrial companies. Giovanni Agnelli had learned the single most durable lesson of his life. In moments of national crisis, the man who supplies the state becomes its most important partner. Before the wars, Fiat had faced its first serious reckoning. In 1908, the company was rocked by a financial scandal. Accusations of falsified accounts and inflated share prices. The entire board resigned. Giovanni was taken to court, accused of stock price manipulation. The prosecution failed to secure a conviction. He walked free, but the experience left a permanent mark. More calculated, more insulated, more reliant on political protection. Which brings us to Mussolini. In 1914, Giovanni Agnelli began financing Benito Mussolini's political movement. By the time Mussolini came to power in the 1920s, the relationship was cemented. In 1923, Mussolini named Giovanni to the Italian Senate. Fiat received political cover, favourable labour policy, and a degree of institutional protection few private companies in Europe could match. Giovanni joined the Fascist Party formally in 1932. I want to be precise about what this was. Giovanni Agnelli was not an ideological fascist in the way a true believer was. He was a pragmatist, of the highest order. One revealing detail: when an anti-fascist intellectual admitted his views openly to Giovanni, he reportedly responded, "Better yet, he was playing every side, simultaneously." The fascists got his support. He got his factories. During the Second World War, those same factories produced tanks, aircraft engines, and military equipment for Mussolini's army and its German allies. As the war turned against Italy, Giovanni shifted tone, voicing sympathies with the Allied cause, reading the trajectory of history. It didn't fully save him. In April 1945, Italian authorities temporarily seized his assets for fascist collaboration. The punishment lasted months, not years. Fiat was simply too vital to Italy's post-war reconstruction to dismantle. On December 16, 1945, Giovanni Agnelli died, leaving behind an industrial machine so deeply embedded in Italian life that the country could not function without it. With Giovanni dead and his son Edoardo having died in a seaplane accident in 1935, Fiat passed into custodianship. The man who ran it for 20 years was not an Agnelli. His name was Vittorio Valletta, a cold, precise administrator who had been at Fiat since the 1920s. Valletta used Fiat's industrial weight as a weapon in Italy's post-war political battles. Workers suspected of communist sympathies were dismissed. Fiat's relationship with Marshall Plan reconstruction aid made it critical to keeping the Italian Communist Party, the largest outside the Soviet Union, out of the national government. In 1954, Valletta was a founding member of the Bilderberg Group. The Agnelli family's orbit, even in the interregnum, sat at the intersection of corporate power and geopolitical architecture. The real heir, meanwhile, was being groomed with unusual deliberateness. Gianni Agnelli, born in Turin on March 12, 1921, had his father die when he was 14. His grandfather raised him directly, fought a custody battle to ensure the boy would be shaped in his image. Gianni attended the Pinerolo Cavalry Academy, studied law at Turin, though he never practiced, fought on the Eastern Front and in North Africa, was wounded twice, and ended the war as a liaison officer with American forces, fluent in English, already connected to a world far beyond Turin. By 1963, he was Fiat's managing director. By 1966, Valletta retired. Gianni Agnelli took command. What Gianni Agnelli built between 1966 and the end of the 20th century was not simply a car company. It was something closer to a parallel state. At its peak, Fiat accounted for 4.4% of Italy's total GDP, employed 3.1% of the country's entire industrial workforce, and represented 16.5% of all Italian industrial investment in research. In the 1990s, Agnelli-controlled entities represented more than a quarter of all publicly listed companies on the Milan Stock Exchange by market value. That concentration of power had concrete consequences. Every Italian government policy on manufacturing, labour or energy had to account for Fiat's interests, because destabilising Fiat meant destabilising the Italian economy. Entire towns in northern Italy, Turin, Mirafiori, Pomigliano d'Arco, were socially and economically inseparable from Fiat's production lines. A job at Fiat was identity, stability, belonging to Italy's post-war recovery. One of Gianni's early and most counterintuitive moves came just months after taking command. In 1966, he signed a landmark agreement with the Soviet Union to construct the Avtovaz plant in Togliatti, an unprecedented deal for an Italian private company. Built around Fiat technology, it produced Fiat-derived Lada models, and by the 1980s employed over 100,000 workers and produced more than 1 million vehicles annually. Gianni Agnelli had fought the Soviets on the Eastern Front. Now he was building their car industry. Ideology was irrelevant. Profit was not. Under his stewardship, Fiat absorbed Italy's most important automotive names. In 1969, Fiat acquired a 50% stake in Ferrari, negotiated partly through Gianni's personal relationship with Enzo Ferrari. That stake grew to approximately 90%, including shares Enzo had retained for his estate. The same year, Fiat acquired Lancia. In 1986, Alfa Romeo, and that acquisition came through a calculated intervention. Ford had made a serious bid, offering a significant premium. Enrico Cuccia, head of Mediobanca and the Agnelli family's key financial advisor, used every lever available to collapse Ford's offer. Fiat acquired Alfa Romeo at a price well below what Ford had proposed. In 1990, Fiat added Maserati. By that point, every significant Italian automotive marque carried an Agnelli fingerprint. Gianni also attempted to acquire Citroën, Europe's second-largest automaker owned by the Michelin family. The negotiations moved. Then French President Charles de Gaulle personally blocked the deal, refusing to allow foreign control of a national symbol. Fiat was limited to a 15% stake. The lesson was absorbed. Political will, when mobilized, could override economic logic. If you wanted durable power, you needed more than factories. You needed to shape what people believed. In 1976, Gianni sold a 10% stake in Fiat to Colonel Gaddafi's Libyan government, Italy's largest private employer, partially owned by an authoritarian leader. The rationale was financial. Fiat needed capital. Gaddafi needed Western industrial credibility. Through the Bilderberg Group and the Trilateral Commission, Gianni cultivated relationships with the most powerful figures in Western political economy. Henry Kissinger described him as Italy's permanent establishment, not a member of the establishment itself. In 1979, that establishment faced its most direct challenge. Workers held the Mirafiori plant gates for 35 days. The Communist Party and trade unions pressed hard. Gianni responded by organising a countermarch of 40,000 workers who broke through the picket lines. After Mirafiori, the unions never held the same power over Fiat again. In 1991, Gianni was named Senator for Life by the Italian Republic. He had never held elected office. He did not need to. To understand the Agnelli family's staying power, you have to understand the architecture of control they built, because it is not simple ownership. It is ownership designed for durability, for insulation, and for intergenerational transmission. At the top sits a private entity, Giovanni Agnelli BV, incorporated in the Netherlands, owned by members of the extended Agnelli family. It controls Exor NV, a publicly listed holding company also incorporated in the Netherlands and listed on Euronext Amsterdam. As of February 2024, Giovanni Agnelli BV holds 56.9% of Exor's outstanding shares and, critically, 86% of the voting rights. That gap between economic ownership and voting control is deliberate. The family retains decision-making authority even as outside investors hold economic stakes. Control stays concentrated, accountability is diluted. This structure has a history. The original holding vehicle, IFY, the Istituto Finanziario Industriale, was established by Giovanni Agnelli in Turin on July 27, 1927, to consolidate stakes across Fiat and a diversified portfolio: food through Cinzano, insurance through Sava, real estate at Sestria, and newspapers. La Stampa was acquired during the same period. Over decades, the structure evolved. IFI became IFIL Investments, then merged with IFIL in 2009 to create Exor SPA. In 2016, Exor's legal and fiscal base moved to the Netherlands, officially a structural simplification. In practice, aligning the empire with a more favourable European corporate and tax framework. By that point, the Agnellis were no longer simply an Italian industrial family. They were a European investment dynasty, operating under Dutch corporate law. As of December 31, 2024, Exor had a net asset value of €38.212 billion, a compound annual growth rate of approximately 13.5% over the preceding period. The portfolio included controlling stakes in Stellantis, Ferrari, CNH Industrial, Juventus FC, and GEDI Gruppo Editoriale, a 43 to 47% stake in The Economist Group, a 15% stake in Royal Philips, acquired in August 2023 for €2.6 billion, and a 10.1% stake in Clarivat, a New York-listed data and analytics company, with rights to increase to 17.5%. In 2023, Exor recorded a net profit of €4.2 billion, with €835 million from dividends alone. The Agnellis built their empire on cars. They kept it through culture. Juventus came first. In 1923, Giovanni Agnelli acquired the club. The same year, Mussolini named him to the Senate. Football united Italy across class lines, across north and south, across political divides. Owning Juventus placed the family at the emotional centre of Italian identity. Every subsequent generation maintained that bond. Gianni served as club president from 1947 to 1954, leading Juventus to 10 Italian championships, 4 domestic cups, 1 European Cup, 3 UEFA Cups, and more. His brother Umberto became honorary chairman. Umberto's son Andrea served as president until 2022. As of today, Exor owns approximately 64% of Juventus shares and 78% of the voting rights. Ferrari is a different kind of story. Fiat acquired a 50% stake in 1969. By 1988, that had grown to approximately 90%, absorbing even Enzo Ferrari's personal estate shares. In 2016, Ferrari was spun out of Fiat Chrysler Automobiles and listed separately on the New York Stock Exchange. As of April 2026, Ferrari's market capitalization stands at approximately $3 billion. Exor retains approximately 20% economic interest and 30% voting rights, following a partial sale of 4% of the stake for €3 billion in February 2025. Combined with a shareholder agreement with Piero Ferrari, the family controls approximately 48% of votes at general meetings. They do not need full ownership. The governance structure is designed, so they never did. What Ferrari represents in this empire is distinct from Juventus or Fiat. Juventus is an emotional attachment. Fiat was mass employment and national identity. Ferrari is something rarer, global prestige, the brand, its prancing horse, its Formula One heritage, its deliberate scarcity, extends the Agnelli family's reputation into the realm of global luxury. That halo cannot be expressed in net asset value alone. No dynasty operates without reversal. When Gianni Agnelli died in January 2003 at 81, the succession question was already resolved. Under painful circumstances, his son Edoardo, deeply troubled and estranged from the family business, had died in November 2000, found under a bridge on the outskirts of Turin. The official account is suicide. Questions about the circumstances have persisted in Italian media. His bodyguard was absent. Surveillance cameras reportedly produced no usable footage. The family arranged a burial, without an autopsy. I will go no further than the documented record. Gianni had selected his successor before Edoardo's death. In 1997, he publicly named his grandson John Elkann, born in 1976, son of his daughter Margherita, as the family's chosen heir. Elkann was placed on Fiat's board at 21, and by 2009 had assumed the chairmanship of Exor at 33. The critical management decision of the post-Gianni era was not made by the family, but with its blessing, Elkann recruited Sergio Marchionne, then running a Swiss certification company, to lead Fiat in 2004. Marchionne executed one of the most remarkable industrial turnarounds in European corporate history. When Chrysler filed for bankruptcy in 2009, he negotiated Fiat's entry into the restructuring, acquiring stakes through performance milestones, and formally merging both companies into Fiat Chrysler Automobiles in 2014. In 2021, FCA merged with France's group PSA, incorporating Peugeot, Citroën, Opel and Vauxhall to create Stellantis, immediately ranking among the 4 largest automakers globally. Stellantis has become the empire's most visible source of strain. In 2024, the company recorded a total shareholder return of negative 36%. CEO Carlos Tavares resigned abruptly. Production at multiple Italian plants was repeatedly suspended. Elkann was named interim CEO. Italian Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini publicly blamed the Agnelli family, the largest shareholder at 14.2% through Exor, for the company's troubles. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni stated Stellantis had become more French than Italian, and criticised Elkann directly for acting against the Italian national interest as manufacturing operations shifted abroad while the company continued drawing on Italian state support. Elkann declined invitations to address Parliament. This tension runs through the Agnelli story across generations. The family built their empire by making themselves essential to Italy, but in the 21st century, with Exor incorporated in the Netherlands and investments spanning healthcare, data analytics, clean energy and global media, the country that gave them their foundation is now, in some ways, simply another market in their portfolio. The Agnellis were in newspapers before they were in politics. La Stampa was acquired during the Affai period of the 1920s. Local, Turinese, a natural extension of the family's regional power base. What happened under John Elkann was different in scale. In 2019, Exor acquired a majority stake in Gedi Gruppo Editoriale, Italy's largest media group, from the De Benedetti family's holding company CIR, for approximately €102 million. GEDI's portfolio included La Repubblica, Italy's highest circulation national newspaper, La Stampa, 13 regional newspapers and radio properties, including Radio DJ and Radio Capital. In December 2025, journalists at La Stampa and La Repubblica went on strike over reports of a potential sale of Italian media assets to Antenna, a Greek media company. The question of editorial independence under family ownership remains, as of 2026, unresolved. Power concentrated over a century accumulates not just assets, but liabilities. In 2007, Italy's market regulator Consob fined the Agnelli holding company, then called IFIL, for an illegal trading arrangement executed in 2005. Financial and reputational, but it did not alter the family's position. Juventus has been the more damaging front. In 2022, prosecutors and Consob opened an investigation into alleged false accounting connected to player transfer transactions between 2019 and 2021. Accusations that Juventus had misrepresented player valuations and deferred wage agreements to distort its reported financial position. Andrea Agnelli resigned, along with the entire board of directors. An initial points penalty was subsequently reversed, but the reputational damage was significant. Over 4 years, Juventus absorbed approximately €700 million in capital injections from shareholders, of which Exor provided roughly 2/3. Marella Caracciolo had transferred control of key family holding structures to the Elkann children, in ways that excluded Margherita's 5 children from her second marriage. In September 2024, Italian tax police executed searches connected to the case. The investigation focused on allegations that John, Lapo and Ginevra Elkann failed to pay Italian taxes on assets inherited from grandmother Marella Caracciolo, who died in 2019 with an estate valued at approximately €800 million. Prosecutors argued she'd been an Italian resident since at least 2010, not Swiss, as the family claimed. Nearly €75 million in assets were seized, from 5 individuals including the Elkann siblings. John Elkann was not supposed to be in this position. The original succession pointed to Gianni's nephew, Giovanni Alberto Agnelli, who died of cancer in 1997 at 33. After that, Gianni made his choice. His daughter's son, raised in London, Paris and New York, educated in international schools, speaking Italian as one of several languages, someone who looked outward from the beginning. Giovanni Agnelli invested $400 in a car company in Turin in 1899. His family paid no Italian inheritance tax on an estate valued at €800 million when his wife died in 2019, at least not until a settlement was forced in 2025. Between those two facts lies a century and a quarter of the most consequential concentration of private power in the history of modern Italy. What makes the Agnelli story worth studying is not the wealth. There are wealthier families in the world. It is the architecture, the way they built not just companies, but structures of control, holding companies inside holding companies, private entities with disproportionate voting rights, key relationships with bankers and regulators that could redirect entire industries, and a cultural presence through football, motorsport and media that made the family feel, to ordinary Italians, like an inseparable part of national identity. Governments in Italy changed 54 times in the 60 years after the Second World War. The Agnellis did not change. They adapted, and in the distinction between those two things lies the entire secret of their survival. The family now faces its most serious internal fracture in living memory: the tax settlement, the inheritance war, the Elkann-Margherita split, Stellantis bleeding market share. A government openly hostile in a way no government has been since 1945. Whether these pressures represent a genuine reckoning, or simply another storm the family will absorb, I genuinely do not know. What I do know is that every previous reckoning with the Agnellis has ended with the family still in control of the machine. $400, 5 generations, a family that turned a car factory into a continental power, and a country only now beginning to ask whether it was ever in control of its own economy, or whether it was always, quietly, theirs. If you want to understand how dynastic power is built even further, the structures, the strategies, the intergenerational mechanics, the story of the Rockefellers is the American answer to everything we just covered. Click here to watch now.